Assalamu alaikum everyone. Hope you all are doing great. My name is Tuba and in this English lesson we are going to study the pronunciation of S and ED endings. Pronunciation. We all know that pronunciation is a way in which a word is pronounced, right? Now the question here is why are we focusing only on the pronunciation of S and ED endings as we have other endings too like ing, ly or NESS? That is because these two are most common and frequently used markers, and if the pronunciation of these common markers were straightforward as in the case with others like ing, ly or NESS, there would be no need for this discussion. Now, as we know that S and ED markers are common in English, so it is very important that we know when do we use these markers and how to pronounce these endings. Let's begin with the scope of S. We use the marker S in regular plural nouns, example buses, books, words. We use it in the third person singular of verbs, example she watches, he eats, she prays. Also, we use it to mark possession, like Alice's books, Zakhraf's water bottle, Neha's cat, right? Did you notice how the final S sound is pronounced in three different ways? Look at how the final S is pronounced in the first column. Buses, watches, Alice's. There is a is sound. The S sounds like is, buses, watches, Alice's. Now look at the second column. Books, eats, Zakhrafs. The S sounds like s, books, eats, Zakhrafs. Now look at the third column. Words, praise, Nehas. The S sounds like z. There is a buzzing sound. In English, there are many words that ends in ed. There are regular verbs in the past tense, for example, wanted, helped, called. There are regular past participles, example, needed, looked, cleaned. Also, there are many adjectives that ends in ed, for example, infected, relaxed, closed. Now again, did you notice how the final ed is pronounced in the first column? It pronounced like ed, wanted, needed, infected. Now look at the second column. Helped, looked, relaxed. The ed is pronounced as the, helped, looked, relaxed. Now look at the third column. Called, cleaned, closed. The ed, the final ed is pronounced as the, called, cleaned, closed. Even native speakers are not usually consciously aware that we have three possible pronunciations for S and ED in English. Now the question is, why do we pronounce S and ED in three different ways? Well, for that we need to learn the difference between voiced and voiceless sounds. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Hope you all are doing great. My name is Tuba and in this English lesson we are going to study the pronunciation of S and ED endings. And remember, all vowel sounds in English are voice sound. You could never pronounce a vowel without using your vocal cords. There is a hint given here by which you can easily identify if a phoneme is voiced or voiceless. For that, put your finger over your Adam's apple. If you feel an increased vibration, then it is a voice sound. Rule number 2. When the verb or adjectives end in a voice consonant sound, b, v, g, d, r, l, m, n, ng, and all vowels, the final S is pronounced z. Labs, loves, bags, words, wears, feels, runs, sings. Now that we know the difference between voiced and voiceless sounds, we can now look at the following rules about the correct pronunciation of S and ED in English. Rule number 1. When the nouns or verbs end in a voiceless consonant that are p, f, t, k, th, the final S is pronounced as s. Steps, drops, sports, likes, bath. Rule number 3. When the noun or verbs end with the sound s, z, sh, ch, j, the final S is pronounced is. Raises, quizzes, wishes, beaches, oranges. Now we will discuss the rules about the correct pronunciation of ED in English. Rule number 1. After all voiced consonants that are b, v, g, r, l, m, n, except d, and after all vowel sounds, the final ed is pronounced d. Robbed, loved, offered, learned, named, traveled. Rule number 2. Ed as a separate syllable after d and t. Waited, needed. Rule number 3. After all voiceless consonants that are p, f, t, k, s, ch, sh, the final ed is pronounced t. Wished, laughed, picked, skipped, watched. Hearing the final sound, you can hear the difference by putting an example word in a phrase where the next word begins with a vowel. By doing this, the final ending joins with the beginning vowel sound of the subsequent word. For example, he bagged all of the canes. In this example, bagged all produces the sound of tall. For many students and native speakers, it is much easier to hear the final d, t, s, or z when the next word begins with a vowel sound. It is important to try to say the whole phrase as naturally as possible, which means at normal speed. If you pronounce the word individually, it is much more difficult to hear the sound because you are not pronouncing them naturally as you would in an ongoing conversation. Common ELL mistakes. The most common way to pronounce S is Z, but many natives and ELLs will hear S. The most common way to pronounce ED is D, but many natives and most ELL expect ED. The pronunciation depends completely on the final sound of the word before the marker is added. But English language learner will consider the last letter of a word instead of the last sound when pronouncing the suffix. English language learner will pronounce the word baked as baked because it ends in the letter E, but that is not correct. We will pronounce it as baked because it ends in the sound K. English language learner will pronounce the word laughed as laughed because it ends in the letter H, but that is not correct. The correct pronunciation for this word is laughed because it ends in the sound F. Native language interference. All languages. Initially, all ELLs will mispronounce every S as S at first. The second thing is all ELLs will pronounce every ED as a separate syllable. Example, slapped, slapped. ELLs will repeat the words such as robbed or wrapped correctly, but once ELLs see the form of the word written, they will pronounce them as robbed, rapid. Teaching techniques. Here are some techniques by which learners can easily learn the correct pronunciation for S and ED in English. For beginners, it is helpful to present the word grouped according to the sound instead of the usual alphabetical listing. Like here in this example, there is a list of animal and we have the animals that ends with the sound s, animal that ends with the sound z, and animals that ends with the sound is. This way they can see and understand that although they all have s or es at the end, they still make different sound depending on what the word is. Another really good teaching technique is to use songs because the students are repeating the word after they hear it and without realizing that they are learning a language pattern. For beginning learners, it isn't necessary to go into depth as to why the ending sounds are different. This way, they can easily learn the correct pronunciation. Hope this lesson helped you. Thank you.